Alright guys, welcome back to day 2 to the Learn Coding from Scratch challenge, hashtag Coding from Scratch challenge. And remember, this is all about learning coding from scratch with no money spent and zero experience. So everything has to be free. If you didn't read it yet, freethewageslave.com. If you go to the blog, you'll find this post, Learn Coding from Scratch. And it tells you the rules. There's a video I made that walks you through this blog post, and it will talk to you about why I'm doing it. But what you'll realize is every day I post the exact resources that I use to learn coding. So I've already got day 1 in the bag, that post is there. This is day 2. So here's what I read today. So I read this really nice post by BitDegree called How to Code for Beginners. And when I read through this, basically the part where this really started to make sense for me was here, which is the step-by-step guide to coding for dummies. And I'm definitely a dummy when it comes to coding. So the first thing was work out why you want to learn code. We know that my goal is to build a web app, to be able to build web apps so I can just quickly have an idea, create something cool and get it out into the world. So this was then really interesting for me. Choose the right languages. Different types of programming require different skills. And they basically went through a list of different coding languages. It was a little bit confusing. It looks like there's a lot of different types. So Java, they're saying, is the king, and Python is the queen. So these are two that kind of stood out on my radar as two that perhaps I should start to look at. Then we looked at Ruby, and this seems to be about a framework for web development. And I don't really know what that means, but the part that I did like is it works for front and back end development, which what I understand is the back end is like the database where all of the data is stored, and then the front end is how it looks, or the user interface, so the part that we use. And then there was all these other languages, and it got a little bit confusing. So I was left really confused about, well, what language should I learn? So the other thing that it told me is I need to download a code editor. So that's a place where you actually write and edit your code. So that was really the two things that made the most sense to me. And I kind of left this blog post at that point. So the next place I went was to Google, which is, well, what is the best language if I want to build a web application? And it took me to Quora. Now this post is a little bit old. I think this is from 2015, but it had this really nice language. So for front-end web development, we've got Java, and back-end we've got JavaScript, and then mobile development, JavaScript. So that's definitely on my radar, JavaScript, because it's used across all of these three things that I think will be useful. So I really kind of looked at this and I read through this post, and they're saying, JavaScript in 2019 in the survey, 70% of developers said they'd used JavaScript in the last year. Along with HTML and CSS, it's essential for front-end web development. So then the last thing that I read was this, which was really nice, from, I think it's Bootybase. And what I loved about this post is this guy said in 2010 he had an idea for a web application so he could organize his shopping list and share it with his family. And he didn't know how to code. He kind of talked about, well, what is a web application? And this was quite interesting. So he's telling us here that a web app is an interactive computer program built with web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this comes up again. And these, are needed for a website. So these are on my radar now. So the program stores database files and manipulates data. And this CRUD is, it creates data, reads data, updates data, and deletes data. So it's a web technology that stores data and manipulates it, used by a team or a single user to perform a task over the internet. So then he gave some examples of, like, Google Docs is an application that's a web application, and this is how it looks. This is what they would call the front end, or what the user would use. There's a lot of use. It stores data, so there's a front end that's online that you can access, and all of your files are there, and you can create, read, update, or delete a document. So that kind of made a lot of sense to me, so I really, really liked that. And he gave some other examples, but this is what I really, really like, the web application development process. So I don't want to learn stuff, I want to be taking action and executing. So there's 8 steps for creating a web application. Define the problem you're solving. Plan the workflow. So after you figure out what you're trying to solve, map out the workflow of how it will work. What needs to happen within your web application for it to solve the problem. Then you wireframe or prototype the web application. So your wireframe is simply a tool for communicating your solution to the target user. So let's just take a look and we'll go for images. Nice and visual. Let's see what they mean by a prototype. So I think it's something like this, where in this case it's a mobile app where you kind of draw out what it will look like on every screen. So it looks like you're kind of mapping out the user experience. You know, they're going to go from this screen to another screen. So you're kind of visualizing the solution before you get into building it. And I think that makes sense. So I quite like that as an idea. So you figure out the problem, then you plan the stages. So for example, okay, they need to input on Airbnb, where do they want to stay and what dates. Then on the next page you would have the list of places that they have available. Then the next page of your workflow you would have the apartment that they look at and all the information on there. And then I guess the next one would be the page where they book, then the page where they pay, and then the page that says thanks, check your email for the confirmation. So the workflow is that series of steps. So then you wireframe and prototype like I just showed you. Now there's this step which is about receiving validation. So the idea here, as I understand it, is if you're creating a piece of software, you want to show that wireframe to users before you actually build it, you get feedback, and then you launch. I'm actually going to skip that because I want to just get things out there. This is about me building things, learning to code and getting them out there. I'm okay with building a really quick, simple version and then getting it out into the world and then making changes rather than having this stage that slows me down beforehand. Now this is the part that I really, really love. Number 5, choose your firepower. So you're going to use different tools, platforms, frameworks to build your web application. It's important to choose a tool that fits the job and not go with what is popular. So rather than me going after JavaScript, I need to figure out, well, what is best for the solution that I'm trying to build, and just learn what I need to build that part of my web app. I think that's such an awesome way of doing it. So rather than going into theory, what do I need to build this thing? How do I just get myself from A to B? What language or technology do I need to learn to do that? I love that. That's really cool. So then you get into building the application. And this part I absolutely love. This really simplifies things. There are just 3 steps in the application. There's the database, which is you figure out what data you need to store, and you then build your database. And I guess there's different technologies for that. Then there's the front end. So he says you'll likely build the front end and the back end at the same time. So just to be clear, the front end is how it looks when you're on the website. That's what you as a user would see. Then the back end is all of the machinery in the back that no one sees that does all of the work. So when you ask Airbnb, I want an apartment in Prague for July, you put that in the front end, and then the back end goes to the database. It pulls up a list of all of the available apartments in July and it serves them to you. Okay. So he says you're going to build the front and back end at the same time. The front end will loosely mirror the wireframe or prototype you validated. So those sketches or those visualizations you did, it's going to look roughly like that. The front end will consist of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's 3 languages that I'm going to need for sure. Then the back end is one of the toughest parts of the web application development process. The primary function of the back end is to provide HTTP endpoints for your front end, authenticate user authorization, and to serve the front end. I have no idea what that means, but we'll figure that out as we go. So again, I think it's really important as you do this challenge, if you're doing it with me, is don't get bogged down by not understanding everything now. Let's just keep moving forward. So you build, and then you test, and then you deploy. So hosting involves running your web application on a server. So remember, the server is the place where all of your files that make your web application work live. And a server is a place that allows other internet users to connect to those files. So when you create your web app, other people can access it, they can use it, and it works. So then there was one other thing he talks about here, which is web application development frameworks. And these make web application development easier rather than coding a web app from scratch. And he went through a number of different frameworks. Honestly, it got confusing, but he gave us back-end frameworks and front-end frameworks. Right now, all I'm paying attention to is a framework means you don't have to code every step from scratch. So what I've understood is those frameworks are like themes. It's like a template that we could then customize. So that's what I learned today. I think my piece of work today is to figure out the problem that I want to solve and then get into prototyping. So I think for today, for day 2, I'm going to get into the problem and the workflow. All right, so we've now spent a little bit more time today. It's the evening on day 2. And what I've now done is I've defined the problem that I'm solving. Then it asked me to plan the workflow of the web application, and that was basically the steps that the user would go through. I've now done that. And then it asked us to wireframe or prototype your web application. So I've done kind of the ghetto version of this, defining it and planning the workflow. I've just done a real basic. So the software I'm going to build, the tool, the web app I'm going to build is called Vegan Checker. And this is a tool for vegans to go into, and people that don't want to use products that are tested on animals, they enter the brand name into here, they hit check, and it comes up with, is the brand vegan and cruelty free? And then who owns the company, and do they test on animals? So currently, now on this page, the brand is going to be carried across from what they entered. So let's just say they put, I don't know, Bath and Body Works. It will say Bath and Body Works is vegan, check if it is, and cruelty free, check. So it's green and with a check. If they're not, then it's going to be red with an X. And then if they are vegan and cruelty free, it's going to link out to some of their products that you can view. This is going to be optional. I'm not 100% sure of that yet. Depends on how much work it'll take. So it's a real simple, just 2-page thing. And what I think it's going to need is 2 front-end pages. So this is a front-end, a user interface, and this is a page the user would see. I think it's going to need a database, which is going to sit in the middle here. So when someone searches and they enter Bath and Body Works, it's going to look up the database, check for a match, and either tell them, yes, here's the information, or no, we don't have that yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build it so that when people enter it, if we don't have a match, we get notified, and then we can add that to the database for future. The other thing we're going to have to do is a data collection process, which means we're going to have to just kind of figure out the world's top, 100 brands, and then figure out if they are vegan, cruelty free, who the parent companies are. So there's a bit of work up front to collect that and put it in the database. But I don't think it's that difficult, and I might live to regret saying that. But what this looks like is it's going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end based on what I read earlier. And in the database, I have no idea how we're going to do that. We might even do a ghetto version where we use a Google Sheet or something like that, just to get something functional. So, I didn't say this is going to be world's best software. This is about me on day 2, already thinking about how to get into execution. I think I'll learn more from action rather than reading 100 things. So if we go back to this, my next step is to wireframe prototype this tomorrow. So I found some cool tools today that I don't know if they're free. I think there's some that are free. And you can come in like this and you actually create like the web application. You actually build the individual screens. So I'm quite excited to dig into those tomorrow. Again, I can't spend any money, so when I see words like pricing, I get scared, but I'm sure we can find something. And then I'm going to do a bit of research on figuring out the database, and I might spend a little bit of time on figuring out how do you actually take that design, which I guess is a graphic, and then convert that into code for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So yeah, that's my next step. I'm super excited. This has been a great day 2. I feel like I've made some progress, and looking forward to getting into day 3. See you in the next video.